How does the Bible apply? Even though we have a little one at home, I'm still finding time to read, even though I'll admit it's much less than I wish I had. But I'm reading a book right now on parenting. And the whole premise of the book is taking the story of Scripture, God's redemptive work in the world, and applying it to parenting. Now that might sound like such a simple idea, at least it did to me, like how come I didn't think about it? But if you stop and think, I think we'll realize it's not actually quite that simple. It's not our natural reaction to ask ourselves that question. How does the Bible apply, or how does the story of Scripture apply? See, I don't know if you're like me. If you think of some topic that you want to know about, what you might do is go to some search engine, type in Bible verses about that topic, whether that be relationships, whether that be peace, truth, etc., etc. We go and we look for verses that deal with that specific topic. But when we do that, when we only look for verses that talk about what we're looking into, we miss something. We miss the whole story of Scripture. We miss how our salvation story applies to every single thing, to every single part of our lives. That even at your workplace, the story of God's redemptive work applies there. That yes, in parenting, God's redemptive work in the Bible through the story of Scripture applies to how you parent. And even in our sadness and grief, we can read about Christ's victory over all things and apply that to our grieving. See, when we only go to the stories and places in Scripture that talk about the specific topics that we're looking for, we miss the whole encompassing nature of what God has done and what God is doing. That yes, in all things, Jesus Christ is there. You know, that's the verse for the National Youth Gathering next year. It's the theme verse for our school this year as well. I want to read you that passage from Colossians 1. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of creation. For in all things in heaven and on earth were created in him. All things, whether visible or invisible, whether thrones or dominions, whether principalities or powers, all things were created through him and for him. He himself is before all things, and all things are held together in him. He is the head of the body, the church, as well as the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he himself may become first in all things. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in the Son, and through him to reconcile all things to himself, by making peace through the blood of his cross, through him, whether things on earth or things in heaven. See, in all things, Jesus Christ is found, as the hymn says. In all things, Jesus is there. There's not one area, one aspect of your life that the story of Jesus, that his salvation won for you, does not apply. So this week, as you go about your days, don't go first to some search engine. Don't go to Google and type in, how does this apply to that? You don't have to know all the stories, all the verses of Scripture. Just stop and ask yourself, how does God's free grace given in and through Jesus, how does Jesus' victory over sin, Satan, and death itself, how does all of that story apply to whatever you're going through today? How does the Bible apply? It applies every day, in everything, and in every way. The Lord bless you this week.